At the graduation ceremony, the crush I had liked for 3 years confessed his love to me. When I was immersed in the joy of my secret love finally blossoming, he suddenly sneered, "You little lickspittle. It's just that I lost a truth or dare game." There was a burst of laughter all around. I looked at him quietly and reached out to gently stroke his face. Then a slap landed. "You're nothing like him. Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe. We update wonderful novels every day. Now, let the story begin." The clear sound of the slap rang out. The whole audience fell silent, as if the air had solidified. All eyes were on me. Brian's face showed a look of shock. I stood there quietly, showing no outward emotion. The previous laughter turned into sighs. I held back the sadness in my heart and clearly heard the sound of my heart breaking. It was crisp and decisive. "What do you mean?" There was anger in Brian's eyes. I tightly clenched my hands, trying to suppress the trembling inside. There was an indescribable heaviness in the air. My eyes gradually became moist and red, and I pursed my lips to keep myself from looking too embarrassed. The Brian in front of me gradually overlapped with the person in my mind. Then it separated again, reflecting Brian's arrogant appearance. Sure enough, no one could replace him. My hand hanging by my side trembled slightly. "You're nothing like him." 3 years ago, I participated in a game test. My target to pursue was Calvin. In the game world, I could vividly feel the existence of this person. He wasn't just data. He was a real, living person. But where there is a first encounter, there is also a parting. When the story ended, I was sent back to my own world along with the system. The moment I stepped out of the vortex, I looked at the familiar game tester in front of me. I dragged my exhausted body home. The scene in front of me seemed almost indistinguishable from the game world. But I could never go back to that time. Looking at the ceiling, hot tears streamed down from my eyes. My friends around me have comforted me countless times, saying that he was just a game character, but I just couldn't get over it. Returning to my college life, I accidentally met Brian, who had similar eyebrows and eyes to Calvin. Perhaps it was really time to give myself a chance to move on. I began to pursue Brian crazily. My bottomless, lickspittle behavior made everyone around me look down on me, but I didn't care. It was the only chance for me to feel that Calvin might still be by my side. Brian and Calvin had many similarities. They were both carefree on the surface, but vulnerable inside. But after all, Brian wasn't Calvin. Watching Brian's expression change from shock to anger, I remained indifferent. The people around began to whisper. They couldn't understand my actions just now, nor could they accept this sudden change. "Brian, you don't understand at all." The news that I slapped Brian spread throughout the school in an instant. My roommate Judy was the first to congratulate me. "You're finally awake. That jerk deserved that slap." I looked at Judy's indignant appearance and smiled with my eyes lowered. To celebrate my getting rid of the label of a lickspittle, Judy specially dragged me to a newly opened tavern opposite the school. "You haven't told me yet. How did you feel about that game you experienced before?" Only Judy knew that I participated in the game test during my freshman year. After coming back, I had been absent-minded and lost. She had never dared to ask. But now, taking advantage of the alcohol, she finally asked the question. It felt average. The mission was to prevent Calvin from being with the bad woman who was using him. In the end, I drove the bad woman away. However, in the end, I became that bad woman myself. Even in this quiet bar, there were many men with both good looks and figures. Judy soon became too busy to deal with me. It was as if I had put up a protective screen, and the world of others had nothing to do with me. Out of boredom, I examined the design of the bar and found that there were large bouquets of gardenias piled up in the middle of the transparent glass window. Gardenias. That was the first bouquet of flowers that Calvin had given me in the game. I didn't expect the boss of this place to have such good taste. I rested my chin in my hand and looked at the gardenias. The sound of the glass cup hitting the table brought me back to reality. "Hello, miss. This is a drink sent to you by our boss. He saw that you've been looking at the gardenias and asked me to tell you that if you like them, he can give you a bouquet as a token of gratitude for your visit." The waiter left with a smile. I picked up the glass in front of me and took a sip. It was actually peach-flavored. "The boss of this place really knows you well. You didn't even order peach-flavored wine today, but he could guess that you like peach flavor." Judy's words woke me up. In a flash of inspiration, I realized something. There might be many people who know that I like peach juice, but there is only one person related to gardenias. It's him. It's Calvin. I pushed through the crowd and quietly followed the waiter. He opened the door and walked into a private room. The door of the private room was tightly closed. I could only lie on the door and eavesdrop. But I couldn't hear anything. What are they talking about? I murmured to myself. The door suddenly opened from the inside, and I lost my balance and fell in. I looked up clumsily and glanced behind the waiter. There was a man sitting in the shadows. He held a cigarette between his fingers, but his face was hidden in the darkness. Sorry, I'll take this lady out right away. The waiter pulled me up from the ground. I broke free and took a few steps forward, trying to see the man's face clearly. Seeing that he was still sitting on the sofa indifferently, I was so annoyed that I shook off the waiter violently. Are there any other young and handsome waiters like you here? Call a few more over. The man sitting in the shadows paused slightly in his action of smoking upon hearing this. I vaguely expected something from him, but the other party just took the last puff and extinguished the cigarette butt. All right, take her out. The man hidden in the dim light finally spoke. His deliberately lowered voice had a faint hoarseness after smoking, but I still recognized it. The man finally stood up and walked in front of me. In the dim light, I still recognized that face. My eyes instantly became moist, and I tried my best to hold back my tears, but I still couldn't hide my excitement. I didn't mistake him, and it was impossible to mistake him. You. His steps suddenly stopped. I watched as he put his hands in his pockets and turned to look at me, but his indifferent eyes made my heart feel cold. Sorry, miss. The second floor is not open to guests. Calvin's eyes didn't dodge at all, and his eyelashes drooped as he looked at me without any emotion. I had the courage to follow him here and find him, but in his polite and distant tone, I felt a bit at a loss. Calvin brushed past me. The room suddenly fell silent again. The waiter politely tried to help me, but I refused. I stood there in a daze, looking at the ground with empty eyes, trying not to cry out loud. No need. I'll go by myself. I needed to find the game planner. I had to ask about this matter clearly. At this moment, I urgently needed an answer and immediately dialed the other person's phone number. After a while, he finally answered. As I listened to what he said, my whole heart sank into an ice cellar, dragging my almost exhausted body home. All I could think about were the words said on the phone. A few days ago, the system reported that the game character Calvin tried to self-destruct, although the protection system automatically stopped it. As a precaution, we made an exchange condition. Calvin was allowed to come to the real world, but once he is recognized by the person who wants to see him, he will be automatically destroyed. Is there no solution? There is no solution. After a long time, there were still only those two words in my mind. No solution. This was a closed loop. I slowly closed my eyes, digesting these facts. The fates of the two of us had been tightly intertwined from the moment we met. One of us must end up unable to forget the other and spend the rest of our lives in memory. I didn't want that for him. The next day, I returned to school with dark circles under my eyes, and I just happened to run into Brian. Brian stood in front of the teaching building, with his hands in his pockets and a look of disdain on his face as he stared at me. Aren't you Miss Camille? What? Did you have a good time acting last night? His tone was sarcastic, and it was obvious that he was still brooding over what had happened yesterday. I remained calm and didn't want him to see the panic in my heart. I've found that some trash just can't stand to see others doing well. I retorted to Brian without being servile or overbearing, but Brian just sneered contemptuously. It was as if my anger was just a clownish act in his eyes. Brian approached me, with a teasing and dangerous look. You don't really think I'll believe you just because you said that, do you? Camille, no matter how much you try to disguise yourself, you can't hide the fact that you were my lickspittle for 3 years. I held back my anger, but I still couldn't help raising my hand, ready to slap him. Brian had expected this and suddenly grabbed my wrist. He squeezed my wrist tightly, and the pain made me frown. The people around began to whisper, and their eyes shifted between us. The corner of Brian's mouth curled into a triumphant smile, but I didn't show the angry or annoyed expression he had expected. In the face of his provocation, I just looked at him calmly. I did regret it. I regretted being obsessed with him just because he somewhat resembled Calvin. My eyes gradually filled with tears, but I refused to let them fall. Now that I think about it, no one can replace Calvin. No one ever could. I took a deep breath and forced myself to break free from the memories. I forcefully shook off Brian's grip, looking at the person in front of me with cold eyes. Brian, who do you think you are? Don't you feel disgusted that you keep coming to slander me to satisfy your vanity? Brian didn't expect me to fight back like this. He was stunned, and his face gradually turned dark. I clearly felt his burning gaze and turned away without hesitation. My steps suddenly became lighter. When I stepped into that tavern again, there weren't many people there yet. Every time I arrived at the tavern, after a while, a faint light would turn on in that room on the second floor. This was the only connection between me and Calvin, and I always followed the routine and ordered that peach wine. The peach flavor was strong, just like the peach juice he held in his hand when he picked me up that afternoon. It was something that was hard to forget. It was like a cycle of fate between us, or like an intersection of time and space. I was immersed in the sweetness of the peach wine, my thoughts drifting into the distance. At the beginning of entering the game, I always regarded him as the target to pursue, but gradually, I found that he seemed to really have flesh and blood, not a character built from data. The feeling of being attracted to Calvin every time couldn't be fake. At the moment of our final separation, I reached out to touch his face, but my fingertips passed through time and space and also through his body. In the end, I still couldn't say those words. I love you, Calvin. I love you. I had been coming here for a week in a row. I looked forward to meeting Calvin here every day, but every time, it was just me sitting quietly in the corner, savoring the peach wine, remembering every bit of our time in the game. Calvin was allowed to come to the real world, and once he is recognized by the person who wants to see him, he will be automatically destroyed. I tightly gripped the wine glass, suppressing the urge to rush into his arms. I couldn't recognize him, but I didn't expect that as soon as I pushed open the door of the tavern that day. I saw the familiar figure. Calvin was wearing a black trench coat, holding a cigarette in his hand, with deep and lonely eyes. It was Calvin. I recognized him almost immediately, and my heart started pounding violently. I suppressed the excitement in my heart and carefully walked over and sat down in the empty seat next to him. The waiter soon brought the peach wine I had ordered. I didn't drink it right away but just looked at Calvin. His profile looked even more three-dimensional under the dim light, and every contour was so familiar. I couldn't help but think of every bit of our time in the game. Those sweet moments seemed like they were just yesterday. The sweetness of the peach wine melted in my mouth, but I couldn't taste anything. My heart was filled with contradictions and struggles. On the one hand, I wanted to recognize Calvin. On the other hand, I was afraid that doing so would make him disappear. The tavern gradually became more crowded. Calvin stood up and was about to go to the second floor. After hesitating for a few seconds, I chased after him. I instinctively wanted to call his name, but at the last moment, I didn't say it. Calvin stopped at the corner of the stairs and looked back at me. I felt my heart suddenly beating very fast. His cold eyes stabbed at my heart, but they didn't push me back. The peach wine is really delicious. I tried to find a suitable opening line, but I found that my voice was trembling a bit. Calvin looked at me, his pupils trembling slightly, but he didn't respond. He nodded slightly and continued to go upstairs. I stood there, hiding my disappointment. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward again. Can I be friends with you? Calvin's eyes darkened, and he stopped again, but he didn't turn around. I pursed my lips and slowly walked in front of him. After a moment of silence, I took the initiative to extend my hand. My name is Camille. Calvin looked down at the hand I extended and didn't shake it for a long time. Holding back the sadness in my heart, I forced a smile, seeing that he opened his mouth but hesitated to speak. I spoke first. I'll call you Peach. After all, the peach wine is really delicious. Calvin's eyes were as deep as the sea, and his gaze was firmly fixed on me. He took a deep breath, suppressing the emotions that were about to overflow, and finally shook my hand. I felt the coldness from his fingertips, and my nose suddenly felt sour. Warmth was engraved in my heart at this moment. Hello, Camille. I'm Peach. After that day, the interactions between me and Calvin gradually increased. We began to meet frequently in the tavern. The content of our conversations also changed from the initial awkwardness to being natural and smooth. But just when everything was getting better, Brian started to disgust me again. A scandal that I was being kept as a mistress spread on the school forum. The attached photos were of me with Calvin in the tavern. I suddenly became the target of public criticism and was spurned by everyone. They were all accusing me of selling my body and soul for money. I was so angry that I was shaking all over. But I was also at a loss as to what to do. You son of a bitch. You even dared to take surreptitious photos. I squeezed the photos in my hand tightly and quickly got up to find Brian. At that moment, he was happily singing in a private room with his new girlfriend in his arms. I suddenly threw all those photos in his face. Brian, aren't you disgusting? Brian's original smiling face turned gloomy the moment he saw the photos. He glanced at the content of the photos and mockingly curled the corners of his mouth. Didn't you always want an opportunity like this to get ahead? Now I've given it to you. So what's with your attitude? Brian's tone was full of disdain and contempt. It was as if I had become a chess piece that he could manipulate at will. I couldn't bear it any longer and directly stepped forward, picked up the wine glass on the table, and splashed it in his face. Shut up. Brian wiped the wine off his face, his expression full of mockery. I didn't expect that you, a lickspittle, have quite a temper. His words were full of insults and scorn. I clenched my fists tightly. The pain of my nails digging into my palms made me calm down a bit. I couldn't lose control here. Otherwise, it would only make Brian even more pleased with himself. I desperately tried to calm my emotions and pretended to be calm. This is the last warning to you. Don't provoke me again. I turned around and left the private room. Brian's mocking words and his girlfriend's giggles gradually faded away. I stood at the end of the corridor, looking out at the night outside the window, my heart in chaos. The photo incident had already made me the target of public criticism, and now Brian was constantly provoking me. I felt as if I had been drawn into a nightmare from which I couldn't escape. Camille, a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. Calvin was standing under a tree a few meters away, seemingly having been waiting for my appearance for a long time. He stood not far away, and the sadness in his eyes was obvious without being said. I opened my mouth but didn't know what to say. Calvin looked at me and slowly walked forward. Silence filled the space between us. I raised my eyes and looked into his eyes, remembering that whenever I was wronged, I would pour out my heart to him. With his company, all my negative energy would gradually fade away, and it seemed that I would only pour out all my sadness in front of him. My nose involuntarily became sour, and my vision in front of me became hazy. Calvin's eyes also seemed to become moist. He pulled me into his arms, and I instinctively leaned my head against his chest. The days when we could only interact through a cold screen had now turned into being able to clearly hear his strong heartbeat. All my grievances finally found an outlet. My tears welled up and silently soaked Calvin's shirt, his arms tightly wrapped around me, as if he wanted to merge me into his body. At that moment, only the sounds of our heartbeats and breaths intertwined. Then I felt the warmth of his breath in my ear. Stop crying. How about I make you a glass of your favorite peach wine? Okay. I returned to the dormitory, turned on the computer, and started dealing with those photos. Just sitting around and waiting for the worst wasn't a good way out. This was what Calvin had told me. I contacted a media company, and they agreed to help me deal with these photos and clarify the truth. At the same time, I released a series of negative information about Brian on the forum, including how he resorted to any means to get ahead and became a male mistress, how he was dating several people at the same time, and so on. Every word was piercing and every word was true. As soon as these negative news were released, they immediately caused a huge stir. Brian's image instantly collapsed, and he became the scumbag in everyone's mouth. And I became the victim and received everyone's sympathy and support. Brian came to me in a fit of rage. Looking at his desperate appearance again, the corners of my mouth couldn't help but rise. Camille, how dare you do this? In the face of his angry roar, my smile became even broader. I just did what you once did to me. Why are you so angry? Moreover, what I said is the truth. Mr. Time Management. Brian was left speechless by my words and stared at me with a pale face. Seeing his chest heaving violently, I provocatively raised my eyebrows. He was so angry with my attitude that he raised his hand, ready to slap me. I didn't have time to dodge and instinctively closed my eyes. If you land that slap, there's probably going to be one more piece of negative news about you. Calvin's voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw him holding up his phone to record. After meeting my gaze, he quickened his pace, until he walked up to me and tightly grasped Brian's wrist. Look, the dog is getting desperate. Calvin's carefree voice came from my side. I suddenly remembered that he had the same tone when we first met in the game. I lowered my eyes to hide my smile. I looked up at Calvin, and a hint of anger was hidden in his slightly furrowed brows. Then he suddenly shook off Brian's hand, using the same method against you as you used against others. Yet you're the one getting anxious first. He mockingly curled the corners of his mouth and looked at Brian with cold eyes. Brian was overwhelmed by his imposing manner and didn't dare to say a word for a moment. Calvin pulled my wrist and led me away from this place full of trouble. Everything seemed to have come to an end. After that, Brian never caused me any trouble again. He probably didn't expect that I would have so much negative information about him in my hands. He also feared Calvin's methods, and the relationship between Calvin and me gradually heated up during this time. It was as if we had returned to the time when we were playing the game, but things didn't go as we wished. One day, I received a call from the game tester. He told me that the system had issued a warning again, because Calvin had left. There was a bug in the game world. If he didn't go back, he would only dissipate in the real world. This was undoubtedly a huge blow to me. I held the phone tightly, and a wave of panic welled up in my heart. Complex and selfish emotions spread in my chest. I didn't want Calvin to go back. I wanted to keep him by my side, but I couldn't bear to watch him dissipate like this. The voice in my ear sounded again. Camille, don't forget, Calvin shouldn't be a person in the real world in the first place. I hung up the phone and sat by the bed with empty eyes. My thoughts were as messy as shredded cotton wool. Calvin, how should I choose between reality and illusion? How should I balance? If I lost him, would my world still be complete? But the tester's words also woke me up. Calvin had always come for me. I had indulged in his company but forgotten that we were never from the same world. Tears suddenly welled up in my eyes and slid down my cheeks. I covered my face and couldn't hold back my emotions anymore. Okay, I promise you. On a sunny weekend, I took Calvin to a resort in the suburbs. The scenery there was beautiful. There were mountains, water, and a lush green meadow. We spread out a picnic mat on the grass and enjoyed the warm sunshine and delicious food. It was as if we had briefly escaped from all the hustle and bustle. Calvin looked at me with full affection as I ate. Peach, do you know the contrapositive answer to I love you? I suddenly asked. He thought for a moment before giving an answer. You don't love me. Then he gently shook his head and gave a different answer. Should it be that if you don't love me, then I will love you? There was finally a smile on my face, but I shook my head to deny both of these answers. I lowered my head and raised the corners of my mouth to give the correct answer. The contrapositive answer to this question is, if someone doesn't love you, then that person must not be me. It's a pity that in my case, this question doesn't have a contrapositive answer, because I will always love you. I still couldn't say these words out loud. Just like in the game, I finally didn't express my feelings, but it seemed that Calvin understood. He smiled brightly and looked at me quietly. We were thus immersed in each other's eyes. This moment seemed like it would last forever. Everything seemed so peaceful, until I walked into this bar with a man. Please give me 2 glasses of peach wine. Thank you. I affectionately held the arm of the man beside me. Calvin didn't expect that there would be someone else by my side today. I saw the loss and pain in his eyes, but he still pretended to be calm and replied, Sorry, the peach wine is sold out today. I had made all the preparations, but when I saw Calvin, I still instinctively fell apart. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I could only pull the person beside me up in a hurry. Since there's none, we'll leave first. Walking on the familiar street, I suddenly felt that it was so long. The boy beside me suddenly asked, Sister, is he the person you said you loved very much? But aren't you pushing him further and further away by doing this? I raised the corners of my mouth bitterly and let out a long sigh. Looking at the scenery in the distance, I couldn't enjoy it. I remained silent for a long time before giving a response. Not all loves can have a happy ending. I also really want to be with him, but I can't. He didn't ask any more questions. After saying goodbye, I stood alone on the street at night, feeling the wind. Maybe if he saw that I loved someone else, Calvin would give up. He would go on with his own life, instead of accommodating me. Suddenly, a warmth and a familiar woody perfume came from behind me. I looked down and saw a broad coat draped over my shoulders. It was Calvin who had caught up. Where's your boyfriend? Did he go back first? I couldn't tell much emotion from his voice, but it still revealed his eagerness. I lowered my head and didn't answer immediately. I just nodded silently. Under the streetlight, I looked up at him. The warm yellow light made his eyebrows and eyes especially gentle. For a moment, under his gaze, I felt as if we had returned to the time when we were in the game. Finally, I slowly spoke. Peach, for some people and some things, it's enough to have them briefly. Right. Jacob fell silent again. He clenched the corner of his clothes. but his eyes still couldn't help but turn red. I bit my lower lip tightly to keep myself from showing any weakness. After a long time, I heard Jacob's sneer. "That's great. Remember to tell me when you get married, and I'll give you a big red envelope." I stared at him blankly, feeling mixed emotions in my heart. The helplessness revealed in Jacob's words made my chest feel bitter. Silence surrounded us again. I seemed to hear his soft sigh and the sound of the distance between us growing farther and farther. "He must be very good to you." "Right. Yeah, he's pretty good to me." "You'll be happy." "Right. You must be happy." Towards the end, I even felt the suppressed sobbing in Jacob's voice. I held back the surging sadness in my heart and forced my tears back. After a long, long time, I finally nodded gently again. "Yeah, I will be." Calvin finally saw me off to the car. He waved at me, and I said goodbye to him, looking at his figure getting smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. I couldn't help but sob. How many more times would we be able to see each other? But I didn't expect that that day would be the last time we met. From that day on, I never saw Calvin again. The faint light in that private room on the second floor never turned on again. The gardenias were always replaced with fresh ones, and the bar was still bustling with activity every day. I often sat there and ordered a glass of peach wine. The waiters all knew me. They didn't ask any more questions but just silently brought the wine to me. I took a sip. The sweet taste reminded me of Calvin. He always looked at me with a smile, his eyes full of affection and tenderness. And now I could only search for those memories in this glass of wine. Until that waiter found me and took me to that private room on the second floor. Only when he took out a letter did I understand. Calvin had already left. I opened the letter with trembling hands, and it was filled with dense words. "Camille, seeing these words is like seeing you. I didn't know how to leave you with my last memory, so I decided to use this method. Forgive my decision. I should still return to the place where I belong. Although I'm reluctant, I think you already knew that the deal for me to come to the real world was that you couldn't recognize me. How many times I wished that you could call out my name, but neither of us dared to take the risk. Forget me, Camille. You know, I'm a character made up of a pile of data, and I will fall into a cycle again and again. You're just a passerby in my life. I will meet the next one, thousands and thousands of others. It's not worth it for you to keep remembering me all the time. So, Camille, forget me. You must definitely forget me. Of course, before the next cycle starts, I will always love you." My hand holding the letter kept shaking. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I quickly wiped them away. I reached out and gently stroked the sofa that Calvin had leaned on. It seemed that his warmth still remained there. I knew that this was the reality that Calvin had to face. It was also the reality that I had to face. I got up and walked to the window, looking at the bustling crowd and traffic outside. But in my heart, I felt an unprecedented emptiness. Calvin had left, and it seemed that the color had also left my life. The ringing of my phone suddenly interrupted the silence. I answered the phone and instinctively wanted to ask, "Judy, do you know Calvin?" "Calvin? Who's that?" So Calvin had really left. No one remembered him, except me. I sat by the window, staring blankly at the world outside. Calvin had already left. His existence seemed to be just a memory of mine alone. At that moment, I understood what it meant to have a heartache like being stabbed. On the street that I was most familiar with. The game tester called me. On the street that I was most familiar with. I squatted down and burst into tears. "Camille." Calvin activated the self-destruction mode. The system didn't detect it in time this time. "Calvin is gone." The call ended, and I tightly clutched the letter. It turns out that when people experience great sorrow, they may even lose the ability to hear sounds. I squatted on the street, put that letter close to my heart, and cried loudly without restraint. Calvin said that he would always love me before the next cycle started. So, there would never be a next cycle. Calvin's side story. My name is Calvin. I am the protagonist in a game, a character to be courted. It was only after I came to what people here call the real world that I understood. For people in the real world, I'm just a pile of data. I can't explain why I came here. I could only hide my identity for the time being and think about taking one step at a time. I don't know which way my life will go, but I know why I'm here. It's all for one person. Just for her, Camille, whom I think about day and night. The person who broke into my life, left an indelible mark, and then disappeared in front of me. On that day, she vanished from my life. I reached out, trying to grab her, but all that passed through my hands was the wind. I don't know how long I was in a daze after she left, and I even felt that life had lost its meaning. I came to the bridge that we had walked across together, standing beside it and looking at the bottomless sea. For the first time, I had the impulse to give up my life, because I couldn't find the meaning of life. I even felt that I didn't have a future life at all. My life was always only depicted in this period. I stepped onto the guardrail beside me, ready to jump off. But at this moment, time stood still. The vehicles and pedestrians all stopped. A mechanical voice rang out in my mind. Attention! Attention! Level 1 alert. The character is attempting self-destruction. Then the system told me everything. Why Camille had appeared here. Why she had disappeared. Those things that couldn't be understood and couldn't be explained by common sense. At this moment, I got all the answers. Then where is she now? The player has safely returned to the real world. Can I go there? The system fell silent. I thought I would never get an answer. So I smoked my first cigarette in my life. After being evaluated by the system, you can be allowed to meet her, but she can't recognize you, and you must unconditionally cooperate when the system needs you to come back. Once she recognizes you, you will be automatically destroyed. You will cease to exist in this world. Okay. I agreed without even thinking. Soon, I was teleported to the real world. With the only money I had on me, I rented a bar. The decorations were all gardenias that she loved. I thought that one day she would come, and she did come. The moment I saw her push the door open and come in on the second floor, I couldn't take my eyes off her. I watched her talk with her friend. I watched her be absent-minded. I watched her look at the gardenias. I couldn't help but ask the waiter to send her a glass of peach wine. She was very smart and quickly realized something. Camille asked me who I was. Perhaps she still remembered me. It's so good that she didn't forget me. But this meeting was really beyond my expectations. I didn't dare to look up for a long time in the dark. I think I'm a coward. But I forgot that the meaning of gardenias is brave love. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails almost dug into my palms. In the end, I still spoke to her in the most unfamiliar tone and attitude with cold words and then fled in a hurry. At the corner, I saw her walking out looking lost. Her back was indescribably lonely. I wanted to rush up and tell her everything. But I couldn't. If I got acquainted with her, I would never be able to see her again. I still want to see her live a wonderful life. Camille's life can go on without me, but her life can't be without happiness. After that day, she came to this bar every day, and I watched her from the private room on the second floor through the faint light. I saw her being lonely, and I saw her being happy. Sometimes she was alone with a glass of peach wine. Sometimes she was with 2 or 3 friends. She was living her own life well. But Camille didn't know that that glass of peach wine was only sold to her. I originally thought that our lives would only be like this. But I didn't expect that she took the initiative to find me. Looking at her familiar face, I suddenly felt scared. I didn't dare to respond to the hand that Camille extended for a long time. I'm really a coward. But Camille's love was too passionate. When I heard her call me Peach, the indifference I had pretended to have melted away in an instant. She gave me a reason to stay by her side reasonably. When I saw her being sad or angry, I would instinctively choose to accompany her to solve all the problems. This kind of life went on for a long time, until one day, I received a message from the system. It was urging me to go back quickly. Just then, I saw Camille coming in with a man on her arm. I knew that this day wouldn't be too late to come. But at this moment, I still couldn't help but laugh at myself. When I saw her smiling at him and snuggling up to him, I would wonder why that person wasn't me. I went up to them. When she talked to me, there was somehow a bit of a sarcastic tone. Was she angry? Or was it her resistance to me as a friend? When they walked past me, the emotions I had been holding back reached their peak. I chased after them regardless of everything. On the sparsely populated street, there was only her thin and lonely back. Where was her boyfriend? I wanted to walk with her for a while. It turned out that Camille had already known the news that I was going back. It's just that she didn't say it, and I didn't ask. By the light of the street lamps, at countless inadvertent moments and in countless sidelong glances, I looked at her again and again. I tried to deeply engrave every move of hers in my mind. I wanted to calm myself down, but I still couldn't control the sobbing in my voice. Finally, I saw her off to the car. In my sight, she got smaller and smaller as the car drove away. I couldn't see her anymore. I silently shed a tear on the empty street. I thought this was the last time I would see her. When I got back to the bar, I wrote a letter, and then I returned to the so-called game world. I began to resist the tasks given to me by the system and came alone to a seaside town at the edge of the world. The people here always had kind smiles on their faces. I bought a house with a yard and adopted many stray animals. They chirped in my ears all day long, and life wasn't too boring. Then it separated again, reflecting Brian's arrogant appearance. What is she doing now? I can't get any news about her, and her news will never reach me either. But later, the animals left me one after another, and I was still like the sea, with no end in sight. I didn't adopt any more animals. The system started to forcibly control my consciousness, making me return to the way I was before. But I promised Camille that I would always love her before the next cycle. I came to the seaside as I used to. Would she like the sea? I think she would. If there is a next life, I hope to be a real person. I want to hold her hand openly and walk beside her. But if I had known that the ending would still be like this, I might as well have hugged her one last time. I sank into the sea and lost all consciousness. I disappeared from this world, or rather, I was never in this world at all. My regret is that I didn't get to say to her in the end, Camille, I love you. Data self-destruction. Success. End of the full text.